She walked into the wrong corridor at the wrong airport, and 7 military war dogs lost their minds. Not barking, not growling, losing it, lunging, spinning, snapping at air, yanking handlers off their feet like they weighed nothing. Armed officers poured in from both ends of the restricted terminal, weapons half drawn, radio chatter spiking into panic. And standing at the center of it all was a 31-year-old ER nurse in green scrubs, a carry-on bag over one shoulder, looking at those dogs the way a surgeon looks at an open chest. Calm, focused, reading. Lieutenant Ethan Cross got in her face inside of 10 seconds. "You don't belong here. Leave now, or I'll have you escorted out in handcuffs." Emma Carter didn't step back, didn't raise her hands, just looked at him with eyes that had seen things this hallway would never understand, and said quietly, "They're not scared of me. They're looking for someone they recognize." Nobody believed her. They should have. But if this story has you hooked already, follow along, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The morning had started the way most of Emma Carter's mornings started, badly and running late. She'd been at Callaway Regional Medical Center until 2 a.m. covering a shift for a colleague whose kid had spiked a fever, which meant she'd gotten maybe 4 hours of sleep on the pull-out couch in her apartment before her alarm dragged her back into consciousness at 6. She'd packed wrong, realized halfway to Hargrove International Airport that she'd left her phone charger on the kitchen counter, and then the rideshare driver had taken the long route around the construction on 5th, which ate 20 minutes she didn't have. By the time she cleared security and reached Gate 14, Emma was operating on exactly 1 cup of gas station coffee and the particular brand of hollow-eyed focus that ER nurses develop after years of being awake when the rest of the world isn't. She was good at functioning in that state. She'd had a lot of practice. What she was not good at was reading airport signage when she was tired. The restricted corridor looked like a maintenance hallway from the entrance. Same gray flooring, same fluorescent ceiling lights, same anonymous door with a push bar. The sign was there. She just didn't register it. Her mind was already 12 steps ahead, doing the mental math on whether she had time to grab food before boarding, whether her mother's medication had been refilled, whether the connecting flight out of Meridian had any legroom at all. She pushed through the door. The smell hit her first, dog. Multiple dogs, and underneath that, the specific combination of gun oil, tactical nylon, and adrenaline-laced sweat that she hadn't encountered in years. Her body recognized it before her brain did. Some deep, trained part of her going very still before she'd even fully processed what she was walking into. The corridor was maybe 60 feet long, wide enough for equipment carts, with temporary kennel panels set up along the right wall. 7 Belgian Malinois. She counted them automatically, registered their condition, their posture, the way their ears were tracking. Military working dogs. She could tell from the harness markings, the clipped efficiency of how they'd been loaded in. Handlers in camo stationed at each kennel. And at the far end, 2 officers with the particular rigid body language of men who believed very strongly in the authority of whatever rank was pinned to their shoulders. She should have backed out immediately. She started to. That's when the first dog saw her. It was the one in Kennel 4, a male, slightly older than the others, a scar running along his left ear. He went rigid the instant his eyes found her, not defensive rigid, the other kind. Recognition rigid, like a dog that has just spotted something it has spent a long time looking for and doesn't know what to do with the feeling. He made a sound that wasn't quite a bark, a low, urgent vocalization. And within 3 seconds, every other dog in that corridor had picked it up. It cascaded into chaos fast. Handlers lurched forward as leashes yanked taut. 2 of the kennel doors rattled hard enough to make the panel frames shake. The Malinois in Kennel 2 reared up and hit the grating with his front paws repeatedly, the sound ringing off the concrete walls. Commands flew. Platz, fuss, ruhig, none of them landing. These were trained military animals performing functions at the highest level of operational canine deployment. And right now they were behaving like they'd collectively forgotten every hour of training they'd ever had. Emma stood frozen in the doorway. She knew what was happening. Some part of her, The part that had spent 3 years working alongside animals exactly like these in conditions that she was legally prohibited from describing in detail, understood the behavior immediately. But that understanding didn't help her in this moment, because right now what mattered was that she was a civilian nurse who had walked into a restricted military corridor and triggered what looked, from the outside, like a serious security incident. She turned to go. "Stop!" The voice was a command, not a request. Emma stopped because she'd spent enough time around people who used that voice to know that not stopping made everything worse. The man who walked toward her was maybe 35, lieutenant's bars on his collar, the kind of jaw that suggested he'd been told he was impressive looking often enough to believe it. He had the movement of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him, people stepping aside, conversations pausing. He moved through the chaos of 7 losing their minds military dogs without breaking stride, which told Emma he was either very experienced or very good at performing confidence. She hadn't decided which yet. "Identification," he said. Emma reached into her bag. "I made a wrong turn. I didn't see the identification now." She pulled out her hospital ID and her driver's license, held them out. He took both without looking at her, glanced at them, looked up. "Emma Carter, ER nurse." He said it the way someone says a word they find mildly ridiculous. "What are you doing back here?" "Wrong door. I was looking for gate 14. Gate 14 is through the main terminal." He handed back her IDs with the particular efficiency of someone who has already made a decision and is just completing paperwork. "The fact that you walked past 2 restricted access signs tells me you either can't read or you thought the signs didn't apply to you. Either way, I didn't see them," Emma said. "I'm sorry. I'll go." "You'll do more than go." He turned to one of the security personnel who'd appeared at the corridor entrance. "Escort this civilian out and flag her with airport security. I want her ID logged." Emma didn't argue. She'd dealt with authority figures who led with humiliation before. It was almost always about something happening in their own chest that had nothing to do with her. She picked up her bag, prepared to follow the security officer. "Lieutenant?" A woman's voice, quieter, from somewhere in the middle of the corridor chaos. Emma glanced back. Master Sergeant Rachel Monroe was standing between kennel panels 3 and 4, and she wasn't looking at Emma the way the lieutenant was. She was looking at her the way someone looks when they're trying to match a face to a memory they can't quite place. Monroe was compact, mid-40s maybe, with the kind of stillness that comes from years of active deployment. Not the stillness of someone who's relaxed, but the stillness of someone who's always slightly ready. Her eyes moved from Emma's hands to her posture to the carry-on bag to her feet. "Hold on a second," Monroe said. The lieutenant turned. "Sergeant," I said, "hold on." Monroe didn't say it loudly, but there was something in it that made the lieutenant pause. She walked toward Emma, stopped about 6 feet away, and studied her with an expression that was difficult to read. "You were going to say something, back there, when Cross asked you what was happening with the dogs." "Cross?" That was his name. Lieutenant Ethan Cross. Emma shook her head. "I was going to leave." "Before that, you started to say something." The dogs were still agitated, not at peak anymore, but unsettled, ears swiveling, paws shifting, that particular low-grade tension that meant they hadn't resolved whatever had triggered them. The handlers were doing their best, but every time Emma shifted her weight, the dog in Kennel 4 cycled back up. Emma looked at Monroe carefully. She made a judgment call about what kind of person she was looking at. Then she said, "They're not scared of me. They're responding to me. It's different." Monroe's eyes didn't change. "How would you know that?" Emma didn't answer. "She's a civilian nurse," Cross said from behind Monroe's shoulder. "She doesn't know anything about military K-9 behavior. She walked through a restricted door and she's stalling to avoid being flagged." "I'm not stalling," Emma said. "Then walk." "Ethan," Monroe said it flat, the way you say a word to make it stop moving. She kept her eyes on Emma. "What's your background?" Emma adjusted the strap of her carry-on. The dog in Kennel 4 made that sound again. The low, urgent one. Not aggression. Something else. She could feel it the way you feel a frequency more than you hear it. "I'm an ER nurse," Emma said. I work at Callaway Regional. I've been there for 4 years. Before that, Emma met Monroe's eyes. She didn't say anything. Before that, Monroe repeated, quieter. Cross made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. This is a waste of everyone's time. The dogs are unsettled because there's a stranger in the corridor. Basic stimulus response. Sergeant Monroe, I'm ordering you to... The kennel panel for dog 4 came off its lower latch. Not completely, the top catch held. But the bottom swung out with a metal bang that sent every handler in the corridor scrambling. The Malinois in 4 hit the gap with his nose, pushing, ears flat in that forward-focused way, not threatening, not snapping, just oriented. Toward Emma. Absolutely and completely toward Emma. Rex Platz! The handler grabbed for the panel. Rex, if that was his name, ignored the command entirely, which was alarming in ways that went beyond the immediate physical problem. Because a military working dog ignoring a command at that level of training wasn't just disobedient. It was a behavioral signal that something had genuinely overridden his conditioning. The corridor erupted again. 5 of the other 6 dogs responded to Rex's escalation by escalating. The 6th, Kennel 7, a younger female, went in the opposite direction and cowered, which was its own problem. Cross was shouting now. Orders to handlers, orders to security, a furious command to someone to get that civilian out right now. Stop! Emma's voice wasn't loud. She didn't know she was going to say it until she said it. Some autopilot kicked in. The same one that took over in trauma bays when there were too many people talking and a patient was crashing and someone needed to make the room listen. It wasn't volume, it was frequency. Everything in the corridor hesitated. Cross turned to her. The expression on his face had moved past authority into something uglier. You don't give orders here. You're a civilian nurse who wandered into a restricted, your dogs are going to injure themselves or their handlers in the next 4 minutes if nothing changes, Emma said. Not aggressive, just a read, delivered clean. The panel latch on Kennel 4 is compromised. If Rex gets through before someone fixes that catch, you've got a loose military working dog in an active airport corridor. Silence. Except for the dogs. Cross stared at her. His jaw was doing something complicated. Who the hell do you think you are? He said. Emma picked up her bag from where she'd set it down. Someone who made a wrong turn. She started toward the exit again. Get your maintenance crew to check the other latches too. If 4 went, the stress load on 2 and 6 is probably... Carter, Monroe's voice. Emma stopped. Stay, Monroe said. And then lower, with something in it that wasn't quite a question. Please. Emma stood there for a moment with her back to the corridor. She could hear Rex still pushing at the loosened panel. She could hear Cross's breathing, which was more ragged than it should have been for a man who was supposed to be in control. She could hear the particular quality of silence that falls when a room full of trained people has run out of trained responses. She turned around. Monroe was watching her with those same flat, careful eyes. But there was something added to them now, the look of someone who has found the edge of a memory they'd given up trying to recover. You're hiding something, Monroe said. I'm trying to catch a flight. No. Monroe shook her head slowly. You knew what Rex was doing before any of us did. You've been reading these dogs since the second you walked in. Nobody does that. Nobody without... She stopped. Her eyes dropped to Emma's right forearm, where the sleeve of her scrub top had slid up an inch or two during all the movement. There was a scar there, not a clean one. The particular shape of a scar that comes from shrapnel at close range. Monroe had enough of her own to recognize the origin. Where did you serve? Monroe asked. Cross made a sound. This is Ethan, Monroe said very quietly. If you say one more thing in the next 30 seconds, I will relieve you of duty pending a conduct review. Do you understand me? The corridor went completely still. Cross's face went through several colors. He understood chain of command well enough to recognize when he was genuinely close to a line. Monroe waited until the silence had settled. Then she looked back at Emma. The dog in Kennel 4 had gone quiet. Not because anything had changed physically. The latch was still compromised. The stimulus was still present. But Rex had gone still in that specific way dogs go still when they're waiting instead of reacting. He was watching Emma with an intensity that was uncomfortable to look at. The way sustained eye contact from an intelligent animal is always slightly uncomfortable because it implies a level of recognition that complicates what you're willing to believe about their inner lives. Emma looked at Rex for a long moment. Then she set her carry-on bag down again. "You want to know what's happening with your dogs?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Monroe said. "And you?" Emma looked at Cross. His jaw was tight enough to crack. "You want to know if I'm a security threat? Clearly you—" "I'm not," Emma said, "but your transport is." She looked at the panels again, ran a quick count. "You're moving 7 MWDs through a civilian terminal during peak transit hours, and something in your pre-mission protocol broke down. These dogs have been in these panels longer than they were conditioned for, and they've been running on high-alert stimulus load since before I walked in. I didn't cause this. I just made it visible." The handler at Kennel 2, young, maybe 23, with the look of someone who'd been holding his breath, exhaled slowly. He glanced at Monroe. "She's right about the timeline, Sergeant. We've been staged here for 90 minutes. Protocol says 60 max." Cross's face did something that might have been the early stage of understanding if it hadn't been so busy defending itself. Monroe hadn't stopped watching Emma. "You said they're responding to you, not scared of you. Why?" Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because some of them have worked with people like me before." "People like you." Monroe repeated it carefully, like she was checking a translation. "You mean combat medics?" Emma didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. "I mean people who spent time in the field alongside MWDs in operational environments," she said. "Dogs like these, the good ones, they don't just remember commands. They remember people, body language, the way someone moves, the way someone smells if they've been in the same kind of situations." She paused. "Rex isn't trying to get to me because he's agitated. He's trying to get to me because somewhere in his training history, someone who moved like me was someone safe." Monroe was very still. "That's not—" Cross started. "Stop," Monroe said. And then to Emma, carefully. "Can you calm them down?" Emma looked at the corridor. 7 dogs. 6 of them still running at elevated stress. 1 compromised latch. 1 handler visibly losing confidence. 2 other handlers exchanging glances that meant they'd started privately wondering if the civilian woman knew something they didn't. It would be so much simpler to just walk out. Emma picked up her bag. "Fix the latch on 4 first," she said. "Get someone on it right now. Then clear everyone out of the corridor except the handlers and Sergeant Monroe." She glanced at Cross. "And him, if he can manage to stay quiet." The look on Cross's face was extraordinary. No one had spoken to him like that since the last time someone significantly outranked him had lost patience. He opened his mouth. Monroe said very softly, "Ethan, not now." Cross closed his mouth. Emma waited while a maintenance call went out, while the corridor cleared of the extra security personnel and airport staff who'd drifted in during the chaos. She waited while a tech arrived and checked the latch on Kennel 4, confirmed it was a fatigue fracture in the catch mechanism, replaced it in 4 minutes flat. She waited while the corridor settled into something approaching stillness. Not calm, not yet, but the kind of waiting stillness that comes just before a thing shifts. Then she walked to the center of the corridor, set her bag against the wall, and stood there for a moment with her hands loose at her sides. She looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. She could feel Monroe behind her, watching. Could feel Cross behind Monroe, jaw still tight, doing the work of a man who has decided to wait and see while maintaining the internal option to declare, afterward, that he had been right all along. She could feel the handlers at each kennel, cautious, professional, not sure what they were about to witness. Emma took a slow breath. And then, in a voice pitched low and absolutely certain, she gave a command that hadn't been used in any standard military K-9 protocol in active service for at least 5 years. A command from a program so classified that its terminology had been officially retired from training manuals and existed now only in the muscle memory of people who'd been there. The word wasn't German, it wasn't English. Every dog in that corridor dropped. Not one at a time, not in a wave. All 7, simultaneously, into perfect sphinx position. Heads up, bodies flat, paws forward, ears swiveled toward Emma with the absolute locked attention of animals who have just heard something their entire nervous system tells them is an authority signal from the highest tier of their conditioning. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Emma had heard in 4 years. Somewhere behind her, she heard a handler say, very quietly, "What?" Monroe made no sound at all. Cross's voice, when it came, was stripped of everything that had been in it before. The authority, the performance, the particular sharp edge of a man accustomed to winning every room he walked into. What came out was small. "Who are you?" Emma looked at the 7 dogs lying in perfect order along the corridor floor. Rex was watching her with those steady, knowing eyes. She thought about the question. She thought about what it would mean to answer it and what it would mean not to. She thought about her flight. Then she thought about Monroe, standing behind her with a scar on her own right forearm and a look in her eyes that said she already half knew the answer and was waiting to see if Emma would tell the truth. "My name is Emma Carter," Emma said. "I'm an ER nurse at Callaway Regional Medical Center." She paused. "And I need to catch my flight." She turned around. Monroe was standing 4 feet away, and the expression on her face was not the expression of a master sergeant doing security assessment. It was the expression of someone who has spent a long time believing a door was locked and has just watched someone open it with a key they shouldn't have. "Emma Carter," Monroe said. "Callaway Regional." She said the words like she was committing them to memory. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" Emma picked up her carry-on bag. "The dogs will hold that position for about 6 more minutes," she said. "That gives you time to get your handlers reset and your transport protocol back on track." She looked at the handlers, each of them still frozen in place at their respective kennels, still not entirely convinced of what they'd just seen. "When I leave, give each dog a release command. Standard decompression sequence. Don't rush it, and get them water before you move them again." She walked toward the exit. She was 3 steps from the door when Monroe said, quietly, but with a certainty that stopped Emma cold, "Your service record doesn't exist in any system I can access." A beat. "But I know someone who can find it." Emma's hand rested on the push bar. Behind her, she could hear the soft, controlled breathing of 7 military working dogs, holding perfect position in a corridor that had been chaos 4 minutes ago. She could hear Cross, somewhere back there, doing something she hadn't expected, staying quiet. Either he'd been genuinely silenced or he was thinking. She wasn't sure which was more dangerous. "You're going to miss your flight," Monroe said. Not a threat, not even pressure. Just an observation from someone who understood that some conversations, once opened, don't close on schedule. Emma pushed through the door. The main terminal swallowed her. Noise and movement, and the generic bustle of 100 people going 100 directions. None of them knowing what had just happened 60 feet away behind a door they'd never noticed. She walked fast, bag over one shoulder, eyes forward, the way she'd learned to walk through places where slowing down cost you things you couldn't afford to lose. She was halfway to gate 14 when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, military area code. She stopped walking. Around her, the airport moved. Announcements cycled. A kid nearby was crying about something, the high, honest tears of someone too young to hold things in. A couple argued quietly about which gate they needed. A coffee cart rattled past. Emma looked at the screen. The text was 4 words. "We need to talk." Emma stared at the 4 words on her screen long enough that the noise of the terminal faded to something abstract, the white noise of a world continuing to operate around a moment that had stopped. "We need to talk." No name, no rank, no context. Just a military area code and 4 words that landed with the specific weight of things that had been considered before being sent. She put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. Gate 14 was another 2 minutes at a normal pace. She pushed it to 90 seconds, weaving through the mid-morning terminal crowd with the muscle memory efficiency of someone who'd spent years moving through tight spaces without slowing down. Field hospitals, forward operating bases, the cluttered corridors of a trauma ward at 1 a.m. She didn't look back. Looking back was how you telegraphed uncertainty to people who were trained to read it. The gate was boarding zone 2 when she arrived. She found a seat at the edge of the waiting area, angled toward the door, back to the wall. Old habit. The phone stayed in her pocket, and she stared at the departure board and told herself she was done with the restricted corridor and the dogs and the look on Rachel Monroe's face, like someone trying to read a document in a language she almost spoke. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. This time a call. Emma let it ring. Watched it ring. Counted 4 cycles, then 5, then it stopped. She exhaled. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for passengers needing additional time. A family with a stroller started gathering their things. Emma pulled out her boarding pass and checked it for something to do with her hands, even though she'd already memorized the seat number. The phone buzzed a 3rd time. Text. The dog in Kennel 4 has a hairline fracture in his right front dew claw. He's been weight compensating for 3 days and his handlers missed it. He'll pull up lame inside of 2 hours of transport. Emma read it twice. She looked at the departure board. She looked at the text. Damn it, she said quietly, to no one. She stood up, picked up her bag, and walked away from gate 14 for the 2nd time that morning. Sabo. Monroe was outside the restricted corridor entrance when Emma came back around the terminal bend. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and the posture of someone who had calculated the odds and decided to wait rather than chase. She'd sent someone else away. The airport security officer who'd been hovering near the door was gone. Just Monroe and the particular quality of stillness Emma had noticed before, the kind that came from years of learning that stillness was its own form of power. You checked Rex's dew claw, Emma said. 2 minutes ago. Monroe pushed off the wall. Vet tech is on the way. He'll need imaging before he moves. If you transport him with that fracture underload, you're looking at a full tear, and a dog like that? Emma stopped. You already know that. I do, Monroe said. Transport is on hold. Emma looked at the corridor door. Where's Cross? Monroe's expression didn't change much, but something around her eyes shifted. Inside. Making calls. Making calls to who? His CO. His CO's CO. Monroe paused. He's working on a way to frame what happened in there so that it sounds like an operational anomaly rather than a lieutenant losing control of his unit because a civilian nurse walked through the wrong door. Emma said nothing. He's good at that, Monroe added, and there was something in it that wasn't admiration. Framing things. They stood in the corridor entrance for a moment, the noise of the main terminal at their backs, the quieter sounds of the restricted hallway ahead. Dogs breathing, handlers murmuring low commands, the mechanical sounds of equipment being checked and rechecked. You didn't come back because of the text, Monroe said. I came back because of Rex. You came back because it bothered you, Monroe said. The idea of a dog getting hurt because someone missed something they should have caught. She paused. That's the thing about people who've worked MWDs in the field. It doesn't go away. Emma adjusted her bag strap. You're still trying to figure out who I am. I already know who you are, Monroe said, with a directness that landed differently than Emma expected. I just don't have the paperwork to prove it. Yet. A sound from inside the corridor. Sharp, a raised voice. Cross. Emma recognized the register of it, a man who had decided that volume could substitute for control. Monroe didn't move toward it immediately, which told Emma something. How long has he been like that? Emma asked. Since he got his commission. Monroe said it flat, no editorializing. He's sharp, good instincts tactically, but he grew up in rooms that agreed with him, and that does something to a person. She finally pushed off the wall, moved toward the door. Come in, please. Emma followed her because Rex's dew claw wasn't going to sort itself out, and because some things, once you'd started them, had an internal logic that pulled you forward whether you intended it or not. Inside, the corridor had reorganized itself into a kind of controlled tension. The dogs were calmer, still alert, ears tracking, but the frantic edge was gone. Whether that was Emma's command still resonating in their conditioning or the simple fact that the stress load had been acknowledged and addressed, she couldn't say. Probably both. Cross was at the far end, phone to his ear, back partly turned. He registered Emma's return with a look that moved through several stages in about 2 seconds. Surprise, irritation, and then something that was trying to be authority, but came out closer to unease. He ended his call. "You came back," he said. "Rex has a dew claw fracture," Emma said. "Someone needs to assess it before you move him." "The vet tech is—" "I know, Monroe told me." Emma set her bag down near the wall. "I'd like to check him while we wait. It'll give me a better read on the severity." Cross stared at her. "You're a nurse, not a veterinarian. Triage anatomy isn't that different at the structural level." Emma looked at him steadily. "And I've done this before." "Done what exactly?" The old edge was back in his voice, but it was doing something different now. It was probing instead of dismissing. He'd had time to think, and thinking had made him more careful, which wasn't the same thing as less dangerous. "Because in the last 40 minutes, you've walked into a restricted military corridor, triggered a full behavioral break in 7 operational K9S, used a command protocol that I don't have clearance to know exists, and now you're standing here like you have authority you haven't explained to anyone." Emma crossed the distance to Kennel 4, crouched down in front of Rex. He watched her come with those steady eyes and made a small sound, low in his chest, not agitation, recognition. She held her hand out, close but not touching. He pressed his nose against her palm. "I don't have authority," she said, still focused on Rex. "I have a working knowledge of what these dogs need, and right now what they need is for everyone to calm down and let the vet tech do her job." She gently moved her hand along Rex's leg, feeling the alignment, watching where he waited. He favored the left side, just slightly, but enough. "It's the right front, between the accessory digit and the metacarpal joint. He's been overcompensating." Silence from Cross. Monroe said, from somewhere behind Emma, "Dr. Yates is 5 minutes out." "Good." Emma sat back on her heels and looked at Rex for a moment. He was still watching her. There was something exhausting about his certainty, the way he'd decided she was a fixed point in whatever map he was navigating. Dogs didn't do that for strangers. Not working dogs. Not at this level of training. Cross crouched down on the other side of the kennel panel, uninvited, which told Emma he'd made some kind of decision. His voice was lower now, stripped of the performance. "That command you used," he said. "Where did you learn it?" Emma kept her eyes on Rex. "You said you don't have clearance." "I don't. I'm asking anyway." "Then the answer is somewhere you don't have clearance to know about." Cross was quiet for a moment. The quality of his silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of someone preparing a countermove. It was the silence of someone who had arrived, slightly against their will, at a moment of genuine curiosity. "You trained with a classified K9 unit," he said. Emma said nothing. "Not as a handler." He was working it out, piece by piece, and doing it out loud, which she suspected was something he rarely let himself do. Thinking in public required the admission that you didn't already know. Handlers don't move the way you do. They have a fixed relationship axis with their dog. You came in here and every dog responded equally, which means your conditioning wasn't breed-specific or unit-specific, it was protocol-wide. He paused. "That's a program. A specific program. And programs like that are attached to deployment environments where the dogs aren't the primary unit." Another pause. Longer. "Combat medic." Emma looked at him for the first time since she'd crouched down. His eyes were different now. Not softer, exactly. Cross didn't seem like the type whose eyes went soft, but quieter. The performance had come down about an inch. "You don't have clearance," Emma said again. "No," he said. "I don't." A beat. "But I'm starting to think I owe you an apology." Emma stood up, brushed dust from her knee. "You ordered a security officer to have me flagged with the airport." "I know." "You called me just a civilian nurse." "I know that too." She looked at him evenly. He held it, which she gave him credit for. Some men, when they realized they'd been wrong, couldn't look straight at the person they'd been wrong toward. They got defensive, or they overcorrected into performance apology, or they changed the subject, cross-held it, uncomfortable, which was at least honest. "The flag can be pulled?" Emma asked. "Already done," Monroe's voice, from 2 panels down. Emma hadn't known she was close enough to hear. Cross nodded once. "I made the call 10 minutes ago." Emma looked at him for another moment. She thought about the 4 words in the text message. The way Monroe had been standing outside that door like someone who'd calculated odds. The way Rex was still watching her from inside Kennel 4 with his quiet, insistent certainty. She thought about her mother's apartment in Clearwater, 400 miles from here, and how she'd promised she'd be there by afternoon. She picked up her bag. "Where's Dr. Yates coming from?" "Airport Medical Services," Monroe said. "She's their on-call veterinary liaison for K9 transport." "Does she have portable imaging?" "She should. It's protocol for military K9 transit staging." "Good." Emma looked at the handlers along the corridor, each of them still at their stations, each of them watching her with that particular expression she'd learned to read over years of working in environments where competence was the only currency that actually mattered. It wasn't quite deference. It wasn't exactly trust yet. It was the open-faced assessment of people who were willing to update their read if the data supported it. While we wait, someone should check the weight distribution on dogs 2 and 6. The stress load from before may have... The corridor door banged open. Not the door Emma had come in through. The far end, the interior access door that connected to the deeper restricted sections of the transit staging area. A man came through it with the movement of someone who had been walking fast for some time and was not planning to slow down. He was in uniform, older than anyone else in the corridor, with the kind of rank on his collar that made Monroe straighten automatically and Cross go very still. Colonel Dennis Hargrove. Emma didn't know his name yet. She knew his type, the architecture of a long career in the creases of his face, the weight of institutional authority in how he used space. He came down the corridor scanning, and his eyes found Emma in about 4 seconds and stayed there. "Sergeant Monroe." He didn't look away from Emma. "Sir? This is her?" "Yes, sir." Hargrove stopped about 8 feet from Emma and looked at her the way someone looks at a document they're trying to authenticate, methodical, unhurried. The kind of assessment that came from decades of experience reading people in high-stakes environments and knowing how to tell truth from performance. Emma looked back at him. "Emma Carter," he said. "Yes." "ER nurse, Callaway Regional." "Yes." "4 years." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite recognition, but the approach to it. "Before Callaway Regional." Emma held his gaze. "Before that is before that, sir." Hargrove's expression didn't change. But something in his posture shifted, infinitesimally, the kind of shift that only mattered if you knew what to look for. He turned to Monroe. "My office flagged an inquiry about 40 minutes ago. Someone ran a service record search on a Carter, Emma M. DOB matching." He paused. "You want to tell me why the results came back classified at a level I don't currently have direct access to?" Monroe said, carefully, "Sir, I'm asking Sergeant Monroe," Hargrove said. "Not you." This to Cross, who had visibly been preparing to speak. Monroe met Hargrove's eyes steadily. "Sir, I believe what happened in this corridor warrants a full situation review before I characterize anything." "That's a very careful answer," Hargrove said. "It's the honest one, sir." He looked back at Emma. The dogs were quiet. Even Rex, who had been the most persistently activated, was in a settled position with his chin near his paws, watching. The handlers stood at their kennels with the stillness of people who understood that what was happening in this conversation was several levels above their pay grade, and the appropriate response was to be invisible. Cross had not moved. His face was doing something Emma hadn't expected. He looked, for the first time since she'd walked through that door, genuinely uncertain. Not of the situation, of himself. "Ms. Carter," Hargrove said, with the weight of someone who chose words with intention, "I've been in this branch for 26 years. In that time, I've seen a service record search come back classified at Tier 4 exactly twice. Both times, the person the record belonged to had been involved in operations that the Department of Defense prefers to acknowledge as having never occurred." He paused. "I'm going to ask you a direct question. You can tell me it's above my clearance level, and I will accept that answer, but I'd rather you answered." Emma said nothing. "Were you," Hargrove said, "attached to a Special Operations K9 medical support program operating under a designation that I probably cannot say out loud in this corridor?" The silence stretched. Somewhere in the terminal beyond the corridor walls, a boarding announcement cycled. Emma's flight, Zone 3 now. She was out of zones. Rex lifted his head and looked at her with those steady, waiting eyes. "My flight," Emma said quietly, "is boarding." "I know," Hargrove said. "I had it held." Emma went very still. 20-minute delay, mechanical inspection, totally routine. Hargrove's voice was dry, not unkind. Remarkable how often those happen when someone makes a call. He looked at her without apology. "I'd like an answer, Miss Carter, and then, I promise you, we're done." Emma looked at Hargrove, at Monroe standing carefully neutral, at Cross, who was watching her with the expression of a man who has realized, too late and too completely, that the person he dismissed in the first 30 seconds of meeting them was not at all who he thought they were. She looked at Rex. Rex thumped his tail once against the kennel floor. Just once. Emma closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, she said, "You should have your people check the classified roster for a program designated Ironwood. It was dissolved 8 years ago." The air in the corridor changed. Hargrove went absolutely still. Monroe's breath caught, quiet but audible. Cross made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "If there's a contact name on the dissolution records," Emma continued, "it'll be a Dr. Miriam Voss, formerly of the Defense Advanced Research Unit. She can confirm operational parameters without breaching the remaining classification." Emma picked up her bag for the 3rd time that morning. "I'd appreciate it if someone could make sure Rex gets his imaging before transport. He's been patient." She walked toward the exit. She was almost to the door when she heard Cross's voice behind her, stripped of everything it had carried when she'd first heard it, quieter than she would have thought it could go. "Carter?" She stopped, didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what it's worth." Emma pushed through the door. She was 15 steps into the main terminal, moving toward the gate when her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out without slowing. Not the unknown military number this time. A different one entirely. An area code she recognized, Washington, D.C. A specific exchange that she had seen exactly twice in her life, both times and circumstances she had never described to anyone. The text contained one word, Ironwood. And then, 3 seconds later, a second message from the same number. "Don't board that plane." Emma stopped walking. The terminal moved around her. A family with rolling luggage, a businessman on his phone, 2 teenagers eating something that smelled like cinnamon. Ordinary friction of ordinary people going ordinary places. She stood in the middle of it and read the 2 messages again, slowly, the way you read something when you need to be absolutely certain your tired brain hasn't misread a word. Ironwood, don't board that plane. She had said that name out loud in a restricted military corridor 40 minutes ago. She had said it to a colonel she'd never met, in a building with active military communications infrastructure, and now someone in Washington, D.C. was texting her a response on a number she did not have saved in any phone she currently owned, which meant either her conversation had been monitored, possible, probable, given the corridor's security architecture, or someone had been waiting. Waiting was worse. Emma pocketed the phone and turned around. She didn't go back to the restricted corridor. She went to the nearest airport map terminal, stood in front of it for 30 seconds like she was checking gates, and used that time to think clearly about what she actually knew versus what she was filling in with assumption. The discipline of that distinction had been drilled into her so thoroughly in another life that it still operated automatically, even after 4 years of ER shifts and deliberately not thinking about certain things. What she knew, someone with a DC exchange that she recognized from a period of her life she did not discuss, had her cell number, and had been notified within minutes of her saying a classified program designation out loud. What she did not know, whether that was protective, threatening, or something more complicated that didn't fit cleanly into either category. What she did know, separately, she was standing in an airport with a held flight, a military colonel who had just heard a name that clearly meant something to him, and a dog with a fractured dew claw who still needed imaging. Emma walked back toward the restricted corridor, and this time she used the correct door. The dynamic inside had reorganized itself in the minutes she'd been gone. Hargrove was on his phone at the far end, body turned away, voice low. Monroe had moved to Rex's kennel and was crouching in front of it with a vet tech Emma didn't recognize. A woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and a portable ultrasound unit that she was prepping with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. Cross was standing against the wall with his arms crossed and an expression Emma couldn't immediately categorize. Not the authority performance from before. Something more internal. 3 of the handlers were watching Emma walk in with expressions ranging from wary to openly curious. The other 2 were focused on their dogs. Monroe looked up when Emma entered. Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, but a loosening of something that had been held. "I thought you'd left," Monroe said. "I did." Emma walked to Rex's kennel, crouched beside Monroe to look at the ultrasound unit's preliminary display. "What are we working with?" The vet tech, her name patch said Yates, angled the screen. Hairline fracture at the proximal end of the dew claw, right front, extending about 4 millimeters into the metacarpal. No displacement yet, but there's swelling in the soft tissue that suggests he's been working through it for at least 72 hours. She glanced at Emma. "You're the one who called it?" "Gait pattern," Emma said. "He was waiting left." Yates nodded. "Good catch. Another 8 to 10 hours of transport stress, and that hairline becomes a full fracture with soft tissue involvement. He'd need surgery." She pulled the probe free, switched the unit off. "He's grounded until this heals." Rex watched all of this from inside his kennel with the dignified patience of an animal who understood that something important was being decided about him and had decided to trust the process. Emma put her fingers through the kennel mesh. He pressed his nose against them. "He remembers you," Yates said. "He thinks he does," Emma said. "He's remembering a type." "What type?" Emma didn't answer that. She stood up and turned and found that Hargrove had ended his call and was watching her from 12 feet away with an expression that had changed since she'd left. The assessment quality was still there, but it had been joined by something else. The particular gravity of a man who has just received information that has rearranged his understanding of a situation and is deciding what to do with it. "Miss Carter," he said. "Colonel. I made a call to a contact at the Defense Personnel Records Division." He paused. "They told me the name I gave them would require a callback from a supervisor's supervisor before they could even confirm or deny the existence of a record. That process takes typically 4 to 6 hours. He let that sit. 20 minutes ago, I received a direct call from a deputy director at a department I won't name in this corridor who told me to, and I'm quoting here, render full assistance and professional courtesy to Ms. Carter and to keep the interaction discreet." He paused again. "You want to tell me who made that call happen?" Emma looked at him evenly. "No." "Fair enough." He didn't seem surprised. "The call also included a request that your flight delay be extended. They'd like you to remain on the ground for the duration of a situation they described as developing." He said the last word with the specific dryness of a man who has spent a career translating bureaucratic language into English. "Do you know what that means?" "I have some ideas," Emma said. "None of them particularly convenient." "No," Hargrove agreed. "They rarely are." He glanced at Cross. "Lieutenant, give us the room." Cross straightened off the wall. Something moved across his face. Not defiance, exactly, but friction. "Sir, with respect, I'm the commanding officer of this transport unit, and whatever is happening here directly affects—" "I'm aware of what you are, Lieutenant," Hargrove said. "Room, now." Cross left. 2 of the handlers followed without being asked, reading the room correctly. Yates finished repacking her equipment, gave Rex a final check, and quietly exited. That left Hargrove, Monroe, Emma, and 3 handlers who had apparently been deemed either necessary or invisible by Hargrove's calculation. 40 minutes ago, Hargrove said, a secondary screening alarm triggered in the cargo staging area on the south side of this terminal. Bags flagged for trace chemical residue. Specifically, a compound that is consistent with a class of material I won't name, but that you would recognize if I described its operational use. Emma's stillness changed quality. Security cleared it as a false positive, Hargrove continued. Standard equipment malfunction, logged and closed, except the officer who logged it, a 12-year TSA veteran who has never filed an anomalous report in his career, flagged it internally to our liaison unit because the compound profile didn't match any standard false positive signature he'd seen before. Hargrove's voice was level, clinical. The dogs in this corridor were originally staged to provide auxiliary sweep capacity during a high-value personnel transfer happening in... He checked his watch. 53 minutes. In Terminal C, Monroe said quietly. They pulled the dogs from the sweep rotation when the behavioral break happened. Right. Hargrove looked at Emma. 7 MWDs who were supposed to be running a secondary sweep of Terminal C's secure zone are currently staged in a restricted corridor, 6 of them unsettled and 1 of them medically grounded because they reacted to you walking through a door. He paused. That's not a criticism. That's a sequence of events that I need to understand so I can decide whether to reinstate the sweep protocol with a reduced unit or escalate to a full lockdown. Emma looked at the remaining dogs. Her brain was running the math, the same math it had run in too many situations she'd spent 4 years trying to stop dreaming about. Resources, gaps, time windows, behavioral reliability. What's the false positive compound profile? She asked. TATP precursor blend, variant signature that our standard detector calibration doesn't catch on first pass, Hargrove said. It's been modified. Emma felt the shift happen somewhere in her chest. The thing that was very specifically not adrenaline but functioned similarly, the particular clarity that came when a situation crystallized from ambiguous to concrete, the tiredness from 4 hours of sleep, the gas station coffee, the gate anxiety. It receded. Not because it was gone, because something else had taken precedence. 6 of your 7 dogs are still operationally capable, she said. Rex is grounded. The other 6 are unsettled but not degraded. Their behavioral break was triggered by social stimulus, not fear or confusion. Their nose work is unaffected. She looked at Monroe. How long since their last calibration run? 2 weeks, Monroe said. Standard interval. Scent discrimination will be fine then. Emma turned back to Hargrove. The problem isn't the dogs. It's that the handlers are shaken. Their dogs read them, and if the handlers go into a sweep feeling like they just lost control of their units, the dogs will work below their capability. Hargrove watched her. You need about 15 minutes with the handlers before you run them, Emma said. Not briefing, just a reset. The dogs need to see their handlers operating with authority before they'll give you their best work. She paused. That's not a complicated fix, but it needs to happen before the sweep, not during. And you know how to do that, Monroe said. It wasn't a question. I know how to do a version of it, Emma said. I'm not their handlers. They'd need to lead it. Hargrove made a decision with the speed of a man who had done a lot of it. Monroe, your point on handler reset. Carter, you'll assist. He looked at her steadily. Assist, not lead. This stays inside our operational structure. Understood, Emma said. It was the right call, and she respected him for making it that way. The last thing a shaken unit needed was an outside figure taking authority. They needed to see their own people steady. Well, what followed was not elegant. Emma would not have called it elegant in the debrief. If there had been a debrief, which there wasn't. What it was honest. Monroe gathered the 6 available handlers in the staging area. 4 men, 2 women, ranging in age from maybe 22 to somewhere in their early 40s. None of them entirely comfortable. All of them doing the professional thing of not showing it, which meant their dogs were reading the suppressed version of the discomfort, which was worse than open anxiety because it was inconsistent. Monroe didn't give a speech. That was the right instinct. Instead, she said, flat and direct, what happened in there was a behavioral anomaly triggered by an external stimulus we didn't anticipate. Your dogs performed within normal parameters for that trigger. This wasn't a failure. She paused. But I need you honest with me right now. Who's not where they need to be? Silence. The kind that happened before someone decided to tell the truth. The youngest handler, the one who'd confirmed the staging timeline to Emma earlier, with the look of someone who'd been holding his breath since the start, raised his chin slightly. Kessler, ma'am. I lost the grip on my read for a while in there. I'm not sure I've fully... That's useful, Monroe said. That's exactly what I need you to tell me. She looked at the others. Anyone else? Two more. Not raised hands exactly. Small acknowledgments, the kind that required something to give way in a person before they could happen. Emma watched from the edge and didn't say anything, because this part wasn't hers. This was Monroe doing what good sergeants did, which was create a 2-minute window where the truth was cheaper to say than it was to swallow. Emma moved among the dogs instead, slowly, without instruction, just presence. She spent 30 seconds with each animal, not commanding, not handling, just existing in their space with the specific quality of calm that she'd learned over years of very different circumstances was the most transferable thing she possessed. She didn't touch most of them, didn't need to. The dogs read the frequency, whatever it was, and the ones that had been carrying elevated tension began to modulate it downward. Handler Kessler watched her with his dog. The dog, a 4-year-old male named Axis, was leaning slightly into Emma's proximity without her having touched him. "How do you do that?" Kessler asked, low, so the others couldn't hear. "I don't do anything," Emma said. "He's deciding." She glanced at Kessler. "The issue isn't that Axis doesn't trust you. The issue is that he's been reading your uncertainty for the last 90 minutes, and he's been trying to manage it. Let him stop managing it, and he'll work fine." Kessler looked at his dog. "How do I do that?" "Stop managing your own face," Emma said. "He doesn't need you to look confident. He needs you to actually be in the moment instead of in the last 40 minutes. She met Kessler's eyes. "You know your dog. You know this sweep protocol. Both of those things are still true." Something loosened in Kessler's posture. Axis felt it. Lifted his head, looked at his handler directly, the line between them reestablishing. Emma moved on. The 15 minutes Hargrove had been given became 18, which was the kind of imprecision that operational reality routinely imposed on operational planning. At 18 minutes and 30 seconds, Monroe gave Emma a look from across the staging area, a look that was asking a question without asking it, and Emma nodded once. The 6 dogs and their handlers moved out toward Terminal C. Emma stood in the staging area with Hargrove and watched them go. "You're not going with them," Hargrove said. "I shouldn't." Emma looked at Rex, still in his kennel, watching the other dogs leave with the attentive, uncomplaining expression of a dog who understood something was happening that he wasn't part of. "I'm not cleared for the sweep zone, and they don't need me now." "Do you think they'll find something?" Emma thought about the compound profile Hargrove had described, the modified signature, the veteran officer who'd flagged it because it didn't match any false positive he'd seen before. She thought about the 53-minute window that was now closer to 35. "I think if it's there to find," she said, "Axis will find it." Hargrove nodded slowly. They stood in silence for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence, the kind that existed between people who had exchanged enough real information that the space between words didn't need filling. "That program," Hargrove said. "Ironwood. I've heard the designation twice in my career. Once from a general whose name I can't tell you, and once from a DoD contractor during a briefing I wasn't supposed to be in." He paused. "People who know it tend not to talk about it." "No," Emma agreed, "they don't." "What happened to it?" Emma watched Rex. "It was dissolved. That's public record, or as close to public as that kind of record gets." "Why?" Emma didn't answer that one. Hargrove seemed to accept it. He was that kind of man. He understood the shape of what he wasn't being told and didn't push past it. "How long have you been at Callaway Regional?" 4 years. "You like it?" The question surprised her, the casualness of it. She looked at him sideways. He seemed genuinely curious, not operational, just human. "Some days," she said, "the days when we fix things, the days when someone comes in and you're the last line between them and something permanent and the line holds." She paused. "I like those days." "And the others?" "The others are harder." She shrugged, and it was a real shrug, not a deflection. "But they're still worth it." Hargrove looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating something. Then his radio crackled. Monroe's voice, tight but controlled. "Colonel Hargrove, Terminal C, Gate 17. Axis has a positive indication. We need bomb disposal, and we need it now." The staging area shifted. Hargrove moving, hands to radio, voice dropping into the register that command voices drop into when the situation has become real. Emma stepped back, out of the operational flow, because this was not her moment to be in the way, but her mind was already running. Gate 17. She knew this airport's layout from the map terminal she'd stood in front of 8 minutes ago. Gate 17 in Terminal C was the secure departure gate used for high-value government personnel transfers. The gate that had been Hargrove's original concern. She looked at the corridor door, counted backward from what Hargrove had said, 53 minutes, minus the time that had passed, minus the time it would take EOD to respond and clear the area and evacuate the gate. Tight, extremely tight, and then Cross came back through the door. He wasn't supposed to be here. Hargrove had cleared him out. But he was here now, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had been making calls in a hallway somewhere and had just heard something that had changed the shape of his afternoon in a significant way. "They found something," he said. "Yes," Emma said. He looked at her. The performance was gone completely, in a way it hadn't been even in his quieter moments before. What was underneath it was younger looking than she expected, and more uncertain. "Because of the dogs," he said. "Because they ran the sweep." "Because your handlers were good enough to run it right," Emma said. "That's what mattered." Cross was quiet. He looked at Rex, still patient in his kennel, and then back at Emma. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Okay." "When I told security to have you flagged," he stopped, started again. "When I called you, what I called you, in the corridor." His jaw worked. "I want to know if there's anything I can do that—" "Right now," Emma said. "What you can do is make sure your unit has everything it needs to support EOD on that sweep. That's what's in front of us." He blinked. "Right." He straightened. "Right." And then he was moving, back into the role, the way people moved back into purpose when given a clear direction. Emma looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. Her phone buzzed. The DC number again. A call this time, not a text. She stared at it for 2 rings, then picked up. The voice on the other end was one she had not heard in 4 years. She would have recognized it after 40. "Emma," said Dr. Miriam Voss, "I think it's time we talked about why you're at Hargrove International." Emma went to the wall and leaned against it, very still. "I'm listening," she said. "There's a secondary device," Voss said, and the words dropped into the conversation with the specific weight of information that reorganized everything around it. "Axis found the primary. The secondary is in the main terminal. We believe it was placed specifically to trigger during the EOD response to the primary, when personnel and resources are concentrated at Terminal C." Emma looked at the door between the restricted corridor and the main terminal. The main terminal, where several hundred ordinary people were currently buying overpriced coffee and arguing about league room and carrying on the ordinary friction of their ordinary lives with no knowledge of what had just been placed somewhere among them. "What do you need from me?" Emma said. There was a half-second pause on Voss's end. Not hesitation, calculation. "The secondary device profile is consistent with a trigger mechanism that responds to elevated radio frequency activity," Voss said. "Which means the moment EOD starts transmitting in Terminal C, we have a window of approximately 4 minutes before the secondary activates. Standard EOD protocol for Terminal C will take 14. Another pause. "We need someone who knows how to move through a civilian environment without triggering additional RF activity, who can locate and manually assess the device before it activates, and who can do it in a way that doesn't cause a panic evacuation, which would itself trigger the mechanism." Emma closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She thought about her mother's apartment in Clearwater. She thought about the medication that needed to be refilled and the lunch she'd promised and the phone charger she'd left on her kitchen counter that morning, like it was the worst thing that could happen to her day. She thought about several hundred people who did not know what was sitting somewhere among them. "What's the secondary device location?" she said. Voss told her. Emma opened her eyes, looked at the corridor door, did the math on time and distance and the particular margins involved in 4 minutes versus 14, and said the words before she'd fully consciously decided to say them. "I'm going to need a frequency-shielded comm unit and a direct line to your EOD lead," she said. And I'm going to need Cross. Cross? Voss's voice was careful. He knows this terminal, Emma said, and he needs to do something useful. She was already moving toward the door when Hargrove's voice came from behind her, from wherever he'd been managing his radio traffic, with the weight of a man who has heard enough of a conversation to understand its shape. Carter. His voice stopped her at the threshold. Whatever Voss just told you, I need to know. Emma turned, looked at him, made the same judgment call she'd been making about people all morning. There's a secondary device in the main terminal, she said. 4-minute window before it activates once EOD goes active in C. She held his gaze. I know where it is. Hargrove stared at her. The corridor was completely still. Rex hadn't moved. The remaining handlers hadn't moved. Everything in the space was waiting, with the particular quality of waiting that existed in the seconds before something irrevocable began. You're a nurse, Hargrove said, not dismissive. The opposite. Like he was reminding himself of a fact that needed to survive what came next. Yes, Emma said. And you're about to walk into a crowded civilian terminal to locate an improvised device. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, not assessing anymore. Something else. What do you need? He said. Emma told him. And somewhere in Terminal C, 51 seconds into the EOD response to the primary device, the radio traffic spiked. And somewhere in the main terminal, in a locker that a maintenance worker had flagged as potentially abandoned 3 days ago and then forgotten to report, a small LED on a secondary trigger circuit blinked from amber to red. The LED blinked red in the dark of the locker, and Emma was already moving. Cross fell into step beside her without being told. She'd said she needed him, and he'd apparently decided that meant immediately and without question, which was the first genuinely useful thing he'd done all morning. He'd shed his overbearing energy somewhere in the corridor and replaced it with something tighter, more functional. Not humility, exactly. More like a man who had recalibrated what the situation required of him and was trying to meet it. Hargrove had gotten them the frequency-shielded comm unit in under 3 minutes, a small earpiece with the encrypted channel that wouldn't spike the RF environment the way standard military radio would. Emma had it in her left ear. The direct line to EOD lead was a woman named Sergeant First Class Dana Price, currently managing the primary device response in Terminal C, who had been briefed in approximately 45 seconds and had responded with the compressed professionalism of someone who processed bad news as operational data. Secondary trigger is RF activated, Price had said. Confirmed 4-minute window from the point our transmitters went active. Timer started 62 seconds ago. That had been 90 seconds ago, which left Emma with somewhere between 90 seconds and nothing, depending on how precise Voss's intelligence was, and intelligence was never as precise as the people delivering it needed it to be. The main terminal felt different now. Not different in any observable way. Still, the same noise, the same foot traffic, the same ambient harmlessness of a public space operating normally. But Emma was moving through it with different eyes, the way you move through environments once you'd learned to read them for threat instead of navigation. And the shift in perception was total and irreversible. It wasn't fear. It was focus, which looked the same from the outside and felt completely different from the inside. Locker bank is past the food court, Cross said. Left corridor, near the ground transport exit. How far? 90 seconds at a walk, less if we move. We walk, Emma said. Running in a civilian terminal before an evacuation order creates the wrong stimulus profile. We need people not paying attention to us. Cross absorbed this without comment. They moved through the food court at the pace of 2 people who were late for a gate but not panicking about it. Emma's eyes tracked the locker bank as soon as it came into view. A row of metal storage units against the left wall, the kind airports provided for passengers with long layovers. Standard configuration. 3 rows, medium and large sizes, numbered sequentially. The unit Voss had identified was L47, large format, second row from the bottom, 40 feet away. Price, Emma said into the comm unit, pitching her voice low enough to not carry. We have visual on the locker bank, approaching now. Copy. Price's voice was even. EOD is 90 seconds from deactivating primary. Once we deactivate, RF environment in Terminal C normalizes. Unknown whether that resets your window or accelerates it. Unknown. Emma filed that. Unknown meant she needed to be faster than the uncertainty. What's the device profile? Emma asked. Small form factor, consistent with a timed secondary, likely a modified commercial initiator. Our assessment is non-fragmentation, designed for infrastructure damage and panic response rather than mass casualties. A pause. That said, in an enclosed public corridor at this proximity, I understand, Emma said. She stopped in front of L47. The locker looked exactly like every other locker in the bank, the kind of ordinary that existed because someone had wanted it to. There was a faint scuff on the lower left corner of the door that could have been anything, and a small adhesive residue near the lock mechanism where a label had been removed. Emma studied it for 2 seconds without touching anything. Cross, she said quietly. Clear a 10-meter radius. Casual. Tell people the area is temporarily closed for maintenance. Point them toward the other terminal exit. Don't use the word evacuate. How do I... You're military, you're in uniform, and you're confident, Emma said. That's enough. Go. He went. She heard him behind her, the shift in his voice as he engaged the nearest cluster of people. A family with 2 kids. Easy authority, mildly apologetic, the words water main check, and other exits actually faster. It wasn't elegant, but it worked because he was in uniform, and people in airports wanted someone in uniform to be the one handling whatever needed handling. Emma crouched in front of the locker. She had done this before. Not this exact thing. The circumstances of the before were specific enough that she didn't like to line them up too precisely against the present, because the comparison was either too comforting or too alarming, and she didn't have the mental bandwidth for either. What she had was the physical memory of what you did and didn't do, the procedural knowledge that lived below conscious thought, and the particular quality of stillness that she'd found, in her experience, was the most important thing you could bring to a moment like this. Still hands, still breath, read before you touch. The lock mechanism had been modified, not obviously, but she could see it now that she was at eye level. The standard coin-operated lock had a secondary component attached to the interior side, visible through the small ventilation gap at the lock edge. A thin wire, copper-colored. RF receiver, almost certainly. Price, Emma said. Lock mechanism has been modified. Secondary receiver attached to interior lock assembly. Confirm. Does the device profile include a physical interrupt option, or is it software-only trigger? A pause that lasted 3 full seconds. Long for Price. Unknown, Price said. Device was reconstructed from partial intelligence. If it's a commercial initiator with a physical interrupt, you'll have a manual bypass option at the receiver. If it's a custom build, then I improvise, Emma said. She looked at the locker. She looked at the wire. Behind her, Cross had moved the immediate radius clear. She could feel the change in foot traffic density, hear the slight acoustic shift as the crowd redistributed itself 10 meters back. Not empty, not obviously cleared, just thinner. She had no tools. She had her hands, her scrub top, and the specific knowledge that the insulation on commercial RF receivers was standardized across about 70% of the market, which meant if this was a commercial component, the interrupt point was at the junction between the receiver coil and the initiator wire, accessible through the ventilation gap if she used something thin enough to reach it without disturbing the primary connection. She pulled her hospital ID badge from her lanyard, thin plastic, rigid enough, narrow enough. Cross, she said. Here. He was behind her left shoulder. She hadn't heard him come back. If I tell you to run, you run, she said. Don't argue, don't look back. Terminal exit, ground level, maximum distance. A beat. What about you? He said. I'll make my own decisions, Emma said. Do you understand? Another beat, shorter. Yes, he said. Emma slid the edge of the ID badge into the ventilation gap. The next 45 seconds were the kind that existed outside normal time, compressed and extended simultaneously, the way extreme focus did to duration. She worked by feel, by the memory in her fingertips of components she'd learned to read in darkness, in noise, in conditions that made a quiet airport corridor seem almost meditative. The receiver coil was exactly where a commercial unit would put it. The initiator wire ran perpendicular. The junction between them was accessible if you came at it from a 17-degree angle and didn't rush. She didn't rush. The badge edge found the junction. She applied pressure, careful and continuous, the kind that interrupted a circuit without triggering a shock response. There was a small, almost inaudible click. The LED she couldn't see stopped blinking. She knew it had stopped because the particular quality of the air changed. Not physically. That wasn't real. She knew that. But something in her nervous system that had been running at a very specific frequency for the last 4 minutes dropped back to baseline, and she had learned to trust that signal. She withdrew the badge slowly, stood up. Her hands were completely steady, which always surprised her afterward, the fact that her hands stayed steady, some physiological stubbornness she'd never fully understood. "Price," she said. "I believe the secondary trigger has been manually interrupted. Recommend EOD team to this location for confirmation and extraction." Price's voice, when it came back, had lost its operational flatness. Not unprofessional, just human. "Copy that, Carter. EOD team en route to your position. Primary is deactivated. Terminal C is secure." A pause. "Good work." Emma looked at her hospital ID badge. There was a small score mark on the edge where it had contacted the wire junction. She put it back on her lanyard. She turned around. Cross was standing 4 feet behind her, and the expression on his face was not one she had a clean category for. It wasn't awe, exactly. It wasn't the calculated recalibration she'd seen earlier. It was something rawer than either. The look of someone who has witnessed something that has permanently adjusted their understanding of what a person can be. He didn't say anything. Emma picked up her carry-on bag from where she'd set it against the wall. "EOD will be here in under 2 minutes, she said. "You should be the one to meet them. This is your unit." "My unit," he said. The words came out strange, like he was testing their weight. "Your transport, your corridor, your handlers." Emma looked at him steadily. "What happened this morning started as your operation. It should end as yours." Cross stared at her. Why are you giving me that?" "Because the dogs did their job, your handlers ran a clean sweep, and you made the right call when it mattered." She paused. "You got out of the way when someone needed the room. That's not nothing." Something shifted in his face. Not absolution. She wasn't offering that, and he'd know it if she tried. Just an accurate accounting of what he'd done right in the second half of this morning, which was different from pretending the first half hadn't happened. "The things I said to you," he started, "are between you and your conscience," Emma said. "And your commanding officer, who I imagine you'll be speaking to later today." The EOD team arrived in fast, quiet efficiency. 4 people in protective gear, moving with the contained urgency of professionals who had been running toward things other people ran away from for long enough that it had become simply the work. Emma briefed the lead technician in 90 seconds. Locker number, lock modification, wire position, interrupt location, current status. The technician listened without interrupting, asked 2 precise questions, and moved. Emma stepped back. Cross stood beside her, slightly behind, watching his airport be made safe by people who were very good at their jobs. The food court was emptying now as a soft evacuation order went out through the PA system. A mechanical issue, calm announcement, nothing to alarm, but please proceed to the indicated exits. It was done well. Whoever was managing the public communications had gotten the tone right. Hargrove's voice came through Emma's earpiece. "Carter, confirmation received from EOD lead. Both devices neutralized. High-value personnel transfer is proceeding with a 40-minute delay." A pause. "You need to tell me what Dr. Voss told you." "The secondary device location," Emma said. "That was all she gave me." "That's not all I'm asking," Hargrove said. "I'm asking why she knew about it. Why she had intelligence on a modified trigger profile that our own security apparatus hadn't developed. Why she called you specifically." His voice was measured, not accusatory, but with the weight of someone who needed real answers. "That conversation needs to happen in person." "I know," Emma said. 10 minutes. My staging area. She pulled the earpiece out and looked at Cross. He was still watching the EOD team work. You should go, she said. He turned. To Hargrove? Eventually. First go check on your handlers and Rex. She adjusted her bag. He's going to need to understand why he got left behind today. He'll be okay, but he needs his handler to show up and tell him so. Cross looked at her for a long moment. Rex's primary handler is Kessler, he said. Then make sure Kessler goes, she said. Cross nodded once, turned, stopped. Carter. He didn't look back. I was wrong about everything I said to you this morning, not just the classification assumptions. A pause. The tone. The way I spoke to you. I don't have an excuse for it. Emma looked at the back of his head. He was holding himself very still in the way of someone who wasn't sure how the thing they'd just said would land and had decided to wait and find out rather than walk it back. I know, she said. He walked away. Hargrove's staging area was not the restricted corridor. It was a secondary operations room further inside the terminal's restricted section, the kind of room that existed in every major transit hub and that most people who moved through airports never saw. Cinderblock walls, folding tables, military-grade communications equipment, a coffee machine that had seen better decades. Monroe was already there when Emma arrived. So was a face Emma hadn't expected. Colonel Dennis Hargrove was standing at the head of the table, but the woman sitting at his right was Dr. Miriam Voss, and she was not on a phone from Washington, D.C. She was in a chair in this room, in a gray blazer with her silver-streaked hair shorter than Emma remembered, and she looked at Emma with the expression of someone who has waited a long time for a conversation and is now managing the relief of finally having it. Emma stopped in the doorway. You're here, Emma said. I've been here since 6 this morning, Voss said. I was attached to the high-value transfer security review. When the primary alarm flagged, I was already in the building. Emma looked at her for a moment. 4 years of distance was not enough to make Miriam Voss into someone you could read quickly. She had a face built for information control, so not cold exactly, but calibrated. Emma had worked under her for long enough to know that the warmth Voss carried was real, and that it coexisted with a capacity for strategic thinking that was also real, and that these two qualities had sometimes been in tension in ways that had complicated things. Sit down, Emma, Voss said. Emma sat. Monroe sat across from her. Hargrove remained standing, which was either a power choice or just how he thought. The intelligence on the secondary device, Hargrove said, came from a source that Dr. Voss has been running for 14 months. That source identified a threat to the high-value transfer 6 days ago. The information about the secondary device was received this morning, approximately 2 hours before you walked into this terminal. Emma looked at Voss. You knew there was a secondary device, and you didn't... I knew there was a secondary device profile consistent with terminal infrastructure targeting, Voss said carefully. I didn't know its location. I didn't know the trigger mechanism in detail. The intelligence was partial. She held Emma's gaze. When the primary was flagged and I realized what was happening, I had 2 options. I could have gone through official channels, which would have taken 40 minutes we didn't have, or I could have called someone who could move fast and who had the specific skill set for manual interrupt in a civilian environment. You called me, Emma said. You were already in the building, Voss said. You had already done the harder part of convincing people on the ground that you were someone worth listening to. A pause. I'm sorry. I know what I asked you to do. Emma looked at the table surface. She thought about the 45 seconds in front of locker L47, the badge edge, the wire junction, the click. She thought about how different that could have gone. Don't, Emma said. Don't what? Don't apologize like it was a mistake. You made a call with the information you had and the resources you had available. Emma looked up. I would have done the same thing. Voss was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her face, the contained version of relief. The program, Hargrove said, not as a question. He'd been patient long enough. Ironwood. I need to understand what I'm dealing with here, Dr. Voss, because I have a lieutenant who spent half this morning publicly dismissing a woman who apparently has a classified service record at a level above my clearance, and I need to know what I'm writing in my incident report. Voss looked at Emma. The look was asking. Emma considered it. She thought about 4 years at Callaway Regional, the particular piece of work that was hard in clear and manageable ways, the careful, ordinary life she'd built around emergency medicine and grocery runs and her mother's medication and the phone charger she kept forgetting on the counter. She thought about how much of that life was predicated on Ironwood staying in the past. She thought about Rex. She thought about Kessler, who'd told the truth about his uncertainty when Monroe asked. She thought about Cross, who had said I was wrong without qualifying it. Tell him what's relevant to today, Emma said to Voss. And nothing else. Voss nodded. She looked at Hargrove. Ironwood was a classified joint program running between the Defense Advanced Research Unit and a Special Operations Medical Division. The program embedded combat medical personnel with specialized canine operational teams in high-density threat environments. The medical personnel were cross-trained in canine behavioral conditioning at an advanced level, specifically to manage animal welfare and handler psychology in extended field deployments where standard veterinary support wasn't available. She paused. Emma Carter was one of 6 personnel who completed full certification under that program. She served 3 operational tours before the program was dissolved on administrative grounds. Hargrove looked at Emma. Administrative grounds? Budget and classification liability, Voss said. The program was effective. The dissolution was a bureaucratic decision, not an operational one. A beat. Emma chose not to return to military service after dissolution. She transitioned to civilian emergency medicine. Monroe, who had been quiet through all of this, said, That command you used in the corridor, the one that dropped all 7 dogs. Emma looked at her. Where does that come from? Ironwood ran a unified behavioral conditioning protocol, Emma said. All the dogs attached to the program were conditioned to the same foundational command set, on the theory that, in a mass casualty environment, a medic might need to manage multiple animals from multiple handlers simultaneously. The command I used was the program's foundational settle signal. It bypasses handler-specific conditioning and goes to the base layer. She paused. Most of the dogs in that corridor were young enough to have been conditioned in their early training by personnel who trained under Ironwood methodology, even after the program dissolved. The methodology was absorbed into standard K9 certification, and the specific signals were retired from active documentation, but they were retained in the base conditioning. She looked at Monroe steadily. Rex is old enough to have been directly conditioned in the program's final operational year. Monroe absorbed this. That's why he knew you. He knew the protocol, Emma said. The protocol is attached to a type of handler, a type of environment. He made an association. She paused. Dogs do that. They remember things as a whole: sound, smell, posture, emotional frequency. When I walked in, he read something that matched a memory. That's all. That's not all, Monroe said quietly. He'd been running elevated for 90 minutes before you came through that door. He calmed down when you walked in. She paused. That's not just association. That's trust. Emma didn't answer that. Hargrove turned to the comms equipment, picked up a handset, set it back down. He was working through something. The lieutenant, he said. Cross. Emma looked at him. His conduct toward you this morning, the dismissal, the security flag, the language he used in front of his unit and in front of airport security personnel. Hargrove said it flat, without editorializing, which was somehow more precise. I want to know if you intend to file a formal complaint. Emma looked at the table again. She thought about Cross walking away from her in the terminal corridor, the back of his head, the stillness before he said, I don't have an excuse for it. What would a formal complaint accomplish? She asked. In this case, given the operational context and the fact that his conduct contributed to a gap in the scheduled sweep protocol, however briefly, it would result in a mandatory conduct review, likely a formal reprimand in his service record, and probably a leadership remediation process. Hargrove's voice was careful. It would be documented, consequential. Emma considered this. Is a formal complaint required for that outcome? She asked. Or does the incident reporting from today establish the record independently? Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. The incident report covers the operational failures, his conduct toward you as a civilian in public, That requires your testimony. Then I'll provide whatever testimony is required, Emma said, but I want to be accurate in it. He made serious errors in judgment and conduct. He also, when the situation required it, got out of the way. I want both of those things in the record. Hargrove held her gaze. That's generous. It's accurate, Emma said. There's a difference. Monroe looked at Emma across the table with the expression of someone who has revised a significant number of their operating assumptions in the space of a morning and is still in the process of filing the revisions. The door opened. Cross came through it. He stopped when he saw the room. Hargrove at the head of the table, Voss, Monroe, Emma. He read the configuration, the weight of it, the way a soldier read a briefing room when the briefing was about him. Hargrove looked at him. Lieutenant Cross. Sir. His voice was even, careful. Sit down. Cross sat at the far end of the table, and Emma watched him make the choice to look at her directly instead of avoiding it. A small choice. Not nothing. Hargrove opened a folder. I have preliminary statements from Sergeant Monroe, Vet Tech Yates, and 3 handlers regarding the events in the restricted corridor between 0847 and 0932 hours today. Those statements will be incorporated into a formal incident report, which will be filed with your commanding officer and forwarded to the Conduct Review Board. He looked at Cross over the folder. You'll have an opportunity to provide your own statement. That opportunity is now. Cross looked at Hargrove, then at Emma. I used poor judgment, he said. My initial assessment of Ms. Carter was based on appearance and designation. I allowed that assessment to override appropriate professional conduct. I issued an order to have her security flagged based on that judgment rather than any actual threat indicator she'd presented. He paused. When the situation required me to adapt, I was slow. I made it harder than it needed to be for the people around me to function. He looked at Hargrove steadily. I have no defense to offer for any of that. Hargrove looked at him for a long moment. No, Hargrove said, you don't. The silence that followed had weight. Not cruel, just proportionate. The kind of silence that existed when someone had been given exactly the accountability the moment required, and not shielded from it. You'll undergo a formal conduct review, Hargrove said. Given the operational gap the behavioral break created, however brief, you'll also face a review of your unit command decisions during the staging window. The outcome of those reviews will determine the subsequent steps. He closed the folder. You're not relieved of command pending the reviews, but you're on notice. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Cross said. Hargrove looked at him one more moment. Then, the dogs are being cleared for transport on a modified schedule. Rex is medically grounded and will be transferred to veterinary care at Fort Kesling for imaging and treatment. Kessler's been assigned to stay with him through the transfer. He paused. That was Emma Carter's recommendation. You should know that. Cross looked at Emma. She didn't say anything. He nodded. Once. The meeting broke apart over the following 20 minutes. Hargrove took a call he needed to take privately. Monroe was needed back with the handlers for transport prep. Voss remained, and when it was just her and Emma in the room, the careful architecture of the formal meeting gave way to something older and more complicated. Voss poured 2 cups from the aged coffee machine without asking, set one in front of Emma, and sat across from her. Emma wrapped her hands around the cup. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway. You've built a good life, Voss said. Emma looked at her. I have. Callaway Regional, your mother, the ordinary things. Voss said it without condescension, with something closer to genuine respect. I think about that sometimes. What it takes to rebuild ordinary after the kind of work we did. You're still in it, Emma said. I am. Voss looked at her cup. Some of us don't know how to do the other thing. Emma thought about that. About the choice she'd made 4 years ago, and the morning she'd just had, and the way the 2 things sat next to each other with an honesty she couldn't quite look away from. What you asked me to do today, Emma said, in front of that locker, I need you to understand that I'm not. She stopped, started again. I made a choice this morning because there were people in that terminal who didn't know they needed someone to make it. That's not the same as being back. That's not the same as being available. Voss looked at her steadily. I know. I don't think you do, Emma said. Not entirely. A silence. The transfer went through, Voss said. The HVT is secure. Both devices are neutralized. The airport reopens to normal operations in about 40 minutes, she paused. The threat cell responsible for the device placement has been under active surveillance for 11 months. Today's incident gives us enough to move on them within the next 72 hours. Emma said nothing. The intelligence that located the secondary device, Voss continued, came from a source we've been developing for over a year. That source is in a position that requires ongoing management by someone the source trusts. She paused. Someone with a specific profile, medical background, K9 experience, someone who operated in environments where the source was also present. Emma set down her coffee cup. She looked at Voss with the specific attention of someone who has heard the first part of something they were not expecting and needs a moment to understand what the rest of it will sound like. No, Emma said. I'm not asking anything tonight, Voss said. I'm telling you something that's true. You're doing more than that, Emma said. Voss was quiet. You're telling me because you think today proved something, Emma said. You think because I walked into a terminal and interrupted a wire and the world didn't end that I'm ready to, that I want to. I think, Voss said carefully, that today happened because of who you are, not who you were. Who you are right now. She looked at Emma steadily. The nurse who checks on a dog's dew claw because she noticed his gait. The person who got a lieutenant with a chip on his shoulder to make space when people needed him to. The one who walked toward a locker instead of away from it. She paused. Callaway Regional has that person. I'm suggesting someone else might need her too. Emma looked at the wall. She thought about her mother in Clearwater and the medication and the lunch she'd promised and how the afternoon was almost gone and she hadn't gotten on a single plane. She thought about Rex in his kennel and Kessler telling the truth about his uncertainty and the sound a circuit made when it interrupted cleanly. She thought about Cross saying, I don't have an excuse, and meaning it. She stood up. My flight, she said. Has been rescheduled, Voss said, automatically when the mechanical hold was lifted. You're booked on the 7:15. Emma looked at her. And if I want to be on the 4:40 instead? Then I'll have someone rebook it, Voss said. It's your choice. Emma picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped. Not because of anything Voss said. Voss hadn't said anything. She stopped because of something in her own chest that she hadn't expected to be there. A small, complicated thing, the shape of a door she thought she'd closed and locked and moved a considerable amount of furniture in front of, that was sitting open by about an inch. 72 hours, she said, her hand on the door frame. Yes, Voss said. The threat cell move. Yes. Emma didn't turn around. Is the source safe in the meantime? A pause. Probably, Voss said. Emma closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Probably, she repeated. She turned around. Voss was watching her with the expression of someone who has learned, over a long career of asking things of people, to wait for the answer without leaning toward it. Emma looked at her for a long moment. I need to call my mother, Emma said. Voss nodded. And then, Emma said, you're going to tell me everything you know about this source, and I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with your current approach, and we are going to have a very honest conversation about what I'm willing and not willing to do. She paused. After which, I am getting on the 7:15. Agreed, Voss said. Emma pulled out her phone, dialed her mother's number, listened to it ring. In the corridor outside, she could hear the sounds of the airport resuming. The PA system. The rumble of the people redistributing back into the terminal. The particular ambient hum of a place returning to its ordinary operations after having been, for a brief stretch of the morning, something else entirely. Her mother picked up on the third ring. Emma? Honey, your flight tracker says there's a delay. Are you still coming? Emma leaned against the doorframe and looked at the wall and chose, for this 30 seconds, to be only the person who was calling her mother. I'm still coming, Mom, she said, just a little later than I thought. Everything okay? Emma thought about locker L47 and a copper wire and a scar on Rex's ear and the look on a lieutenant's face when the version of himself he'd always assumed was accurate stopped adding up. Yeah, she said. Everything's okay? She hung up. turned back into the room. And that was when Voss's phone rang. Not her cell, the secure line she carried in a separate case, the one that had a different ringtone, lower and with no repeat. And the way Voss looked at the screen before she answered it made something tighten in Emma's chest that had nothing to do with anything she could name yet. Voss answered, listened for 11 seconds without speaking. Then she looked at Emma with an expression that had shed everything diplomatic, everything managed, everything that Miriam Voss normally kept between herself and whatever she actually felt. "The source isn't safe," Voss said. Emma set her bag down. "Tell me," she said. Voss spoke for 90 seconds without stopping, and Emma listened the way she'd been trained to listen, not for the words she expected, but for the ones that didn't fit, the gaps between sentences where the real information lived. The source was a logistics contractor embedded with the threat cell. Mid-level, Careful, had been passing information through a dead drop system that Voss's team had been running without direct contact for 11 months. Clean setup, low exposure. It should have held for another 6 weeks until the cell moved on its next operation. Except the primary device had failed to detonate. And when a device failed to detonate, people in the cell started asking why. And when they started asking why, they started looking at who knew what. And when they started looking, 11 months of careful distance between an asset and a handler collapsed from both ends simultaneously. The source's last transmission had come in 40 minutes ago. 4 words in a duress code sequence that Voss's team had established but never expected to use this soon. "Window is closing fast." "Where are they?" Emma said. "Holding position in a vehicle in the airport's long-term parking structure." Voss was already moving to the comms equipment. "The cell has 2 people watching the structure exits. We believe they haven't moved on the source yet because they're not certain. They're running down other possibilities first. That window is probably another 30 to 45 minutes before they rule everything else out." "Extraction team?" 22 minutes out." Voss looked at Emma with the kind of directness that stripped everything except the operative fact. "That's too long." Emma did the math. She'd been doing variations of this math her entire adult life. The specific geometry of too much need and not enough time, and the question of what a person could reasonably be asked to absorb as their portion of the gap. "What's the source's physical status?" "Unknown. Last image we have is 43 minutes old." "Vehicle make?" "Dark blue Chevrolet Traverse, level 3, section G." Emma looked at her bag on the floor. She thought about the 7:15 flight. She thought about her mother, who had said everything okay and accepted the answer because she'd learned, over years of accepting Emma's answers, when to trust them and when to worry. She picked up her bag. "I need Cross," she said. Voss blinked. "Cross?" "He knows this terminal complex. He'll know the parking structure access that doesn't run past the cell's surveillance positions." Emma was already at the door. "And he owes me one." She didn't wait for Voss's response. She found Cross in the main corridor outside the operations room, on his phone, mid-sentence. He read her face when she came through the door and ended the call before the other person had finished speaking. "What do you need?" he said. No preamble, no hesitation. Emma told him in 40 seconds. He listened the way he hadn't listened to her this morning, without preparing his response while she was still talking, without the filter of his own assumptions running interference. He just took it in. "Staff access elevator," he said immediately. "South end of the terminal, behind baggage services. Comes out on level 2 of the parking structure, bypasses the main entrance entirely. I have the key card." He was already moving. "How much time?" "Less than we'd like," Emma said. "When isn't it?" They moved. The staff corridor behind baggage services was narrow and fluorescent lit and smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and the accumulated fatigue of a building that never fully slept. Cross used his keycard at 2 checkpoints without slowing down. Emma kept pace and stayed quiet and let him navigate, because this was his terrain and using it well was the right call, regardless of the morning's earlier arithmetic. The elevator opened onto level 2 of the parking structure. Concrete columns, low ceiling, the specific flat acoustics of an underground space. The smell of exhaust and cold air. "Section G is that way," Cross said. Northeast quadrant, approximately 70 meters. Cell surveillance is on the ground level exits, Emma said. If we stay on level 2 and approach from the interior, they won't have sight lines. Cross looked at her. You're going to make contact with the source. Yes. And then? Get them to the elevator. Back through staff access. Hand them to Voss's team when extraction arrives. Emma looked at him steadily. The source doesn't know me. They'll be frightened and they'll be looking for a reason not to trust whoever comes to them. I need you to hang back unless I signal. Cross frowned. Why? Because a man in military uniform appearing in a parking structure when you're already terrified is not a calming stimulus, Emma said. And because I need someone at the elevator who can hold it if we're running. He absorbed this. It wasn't the role he was built for. The hanging back, the waiting, the trusting that someone else's read on the situation was better than his. She could see him working through it. Okay, he said. They moved northeast through the interior of level 2 between parked cars, keeping to the low visibility lane between the structural columns. Emma counted rows. The dark blue Traverse was visible at section G before she reached it, parked nose in against the outer wall, 2 spaces from the corner, engine off. She could see the slight condensation differential on the driver's side window that suggested someone had been breathing in there for a while. She approached from the passenger side. No sudden movements. No looking around in the way that signaled awareness of surveillance, because signaling awareness of surveillance was its own kind of flag. She knocked on the passenger window. Twice. Slowly. A pause that lasted long enough for her to feel it in her teeth. The window went down 2 inches. The face on the other side was a man in his 40s, brown-haired with the particular flatness of expression that fear produced when someone had been holding it together through sheer will for long enough that their face had run out of bandwidth for anything else. His eyes went to Emma, assessed her in a second, went to the space behind her. I'm alone, Emma said. Quiet, conversational, the tone of someone discussing nothing of consequence. Voss sent me. I'm going to get you out through a staff access route. The extraction team is 18 minutes out, and we're meeting them inside. The man looked at her. What's the duress word? He said. Emma looked at him calmly. Voss hadn't given her a duress word. There hadn't been time. I don't have it, she said. What I have is the knowledge that you sent a 4-word transmission 40 minutes ago using a sequence you've never used before, which means you were already compromised before I got here. And the only reason the cell hasn't moved on you yet is that they're still eliminating other options. She held his gaze. You can wait for the right word, or you can get out of the vehicle right now. A beat. The door opened. His name, Emma learned in the 45 seconds it took to walk him back through the parking structure interior, was Paul Greer. He had a cut on his left hand from something that had happened earlier that morning that he hadn't had time to address, and his breathing was running shallow and fast in the particular pattern of someone whose nervous system had been in crisis mode for too long. He was limping slightly on his right leg, not dramatically, but enough. What happened to your leg? Emma asked. Nothing. You're limping. I said it's nothing. His voice was clipped, the irritability of someone who was frightened and had redirected it. Emma let it go. She'd check it properly when they were through. They were 20 meters from the elevator when she heard it, a sound that wasn't the ambient noise of the parking structure. Footsteps, measured, 2 sets, coming up the vehicle ramp from the ground level. She didn't look back. Looking back telegraphed awareness. Cross, she said, just audible. Elevator, now. Cross had the elevator held. He saw them coming, read the pace, hit the door open button, and held it. Emma put her hand on Greer's arm, not grabbing, just guiding, and they covered the last 20 meters at a pace that was just short of running, the difference between hurrying and fleeing being everything in this particular situation. They made the elevator, the doors closed. Emma heard the footsteps change pace behind them, accelerating, and then the sound of the elevator mechanism engaging was louder than anything else, and the structure disappeared behind brushed steel doors, and the 3 of them stood in a box moving down toward the staff corridor, and Paul Greer leaned against the wall and closed his eyes and exhaled in a single long shudder that was one of the most honest sounds Emma had heard all day. Cross looked at Emma over Greer's head. She nodded. He nodded back. Voss met them at the staff corridor exit with two people Emma didn't know and a medical kit that suggested someone had anticipated that Greer might not arrive in perfect condition. Emma stepped aside while the handoff happened, let Voss take Greer's arm, watched the way his expression shifted when he saw someone he recognized, the specific collapse of held tension that happened when a person finally arrives somewhere safe. She leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the ceiling and let her body understand that the thing was done. Her hands were still steady. They were always still steady afterward. She'd never decided whether that was reassuring or just a biological fact with no particular meaning attached to it. Cross stood a few feet away. He looked like a man at the end of a very long day that had started as a completely different kind of day, which was accurate. "The cell's ground surveillance," Emma said. "They'll know someone made contact with the vehicle." "Already called it in," Cross said. He held up his phone. "Gave Voss's team the vehicle ramp location and the sightline description. They have people on it." Emma looked at him. "You were paying attention," she said. "I've been paying attention for the last 3 hours," he said, "trying to catch up." Greer was being walked further down the corridor by Voss and her people. His limp was more visible now that he wasn't managing it for the parking structure. Emma pushed off the wall. "Hey," she called. Voss looked back. "His right leg," Emma said. "When you get him somewhere stable, have someone look at it properly. It's not nothing." Voss glanced at Greer's leg, back at Emma, nodded. Emma put her back against the wall again. The corridor was quiet except for the distant ambient sounds of the terminal operating above them, the ordinary machinery of a place that had returned to its ordinary purpose. Somewhere up there, people were buying coffee and checking departure boards and having minor arguments about gate assignments, with no knowledge of what the morning had contained. Emma thought that was correct. That was how it should work. The work that prevented the thing people never knew about was supposed to be invisible. You didn't do it so that people knew. You did it so that their ordinary morning remained ordinary. That was the whole point. The formal debrief happened 2 hours later in the same cinderblock operations room, and it was the kind of meeting that Emma had been in enough times to understand its structure before it began. Statements, chronologies, decision points, operational gaps. She gave hers clearly, and without embellishment, answered follow-up questions with the same economy, and noted twice, for the record, the specific contributions that Cross and Monroe and Kessler had each made to the morning's outcome. She wasn't performing graciousness. She was being accurate, because the record should be accurate, and because the record was what lasted after everyone's feelings about the morning had reorganized themselves. Colonel Hargrove ran the debrief with the same measured thoroughness she'd observed in him since first light. He was a careful man in the best sense. Not slow, not hesitant, but someone who understood that the difference between a correct decision and a fast one was not always speed. When Emma finished her statement, Hargrove looked at her across the table and said, "Ms. Carter, for the official record, what I observed today, and what the statements of Sergeant Monroe, Lieutenant Cross, Vet Tech Yates, and handlers Kessler, Drummond, and Walsh all corroborate, constitutes professional conduct at a level that is extraordinary by any standard applicable to this situation." He paused. "That will be reflected in my report." Emma said, "Thank you, sir." "Your service record," Hargrove continued, "will also be formally acknowledged in the incident documentation, not in the public filing, but in the record that the relevant people will read." He held her gaze. "Your name deserves to be attached to what you did today, in a form that doesn't disappear." Emma looked at the table for a moment. She thought about 4 years of not talking about it. The specific daily practice of being Emma Carter, ER nurse, Callaway Regional, coffee from the gas station, 2 shifts a week on night rotation, her mother's medication on the 1st of the month. She thought about how deliberately she'd built that life, and how genuinely she meant it when she said she didn't regret it. She also thought about the sound of 7 military dogs dropping into perfect synchrony in a corridor that had been chaos 6 seconds before. The particular silence that followed. "I'd appreciate that," she said. Hargrove nodded. Cross, at the far end of the table, had his hands flat on the surface in front of him and was looking at them. When Hargrove moved to the next agenda item, Cross looked up and found Emma already looking at him. He said nothing. She said nothing. But something passed between them in that look that was close to an accounting being settled. Not forgiven, exactly. Not the soft version of forgiveness that cost nothing, but acknowledged. The full weight of his conduct this morning, acknowledged, and then set down in its correct place in the sequence of things. That was the honest version of how it worked. People didn't transform. They just sometimes, in the right circumstances, with the right pressure applied at the right angle, showed you a better version of who they already were underneath all the noise they'd built up around themselves. Cross had done that. Imperfectly. Too late. With some stumbling. But he'd done it. Emma decided that was worth counting. At 5:47 in the afternoon, Voss found Emma in the main terminal at a food court table with a coffee. She was actually drinking this time, so not gas station, not great, but hot, and sat across from her with the deliberate lack of urgency of someone who had decided the agenda could wait. "Greer's leg," Voss said. "Contusion. He took a fall in the parking structure before we made contact with him. He's fine." "Good," Emma said. "The cell's surveillance team was picked up 40 minutes ago. 2 more of the cell's active members were identified and detained within the hour. The remaining leadership is under coordinated surveillance pending the operation moving forward in the next 72 hours. Voss looked at her. Greer's intelligence is what made that possible. What he carried out of that situation is going to matter. Emma nodded. And the intelligence he provided, Voss said carefully, included details about a secondary network that extends beyond this specific cell. Details that are going to require considerable time and expertise to fully develop. A pause. You know where I'm going with this. I do, Emma said. And? Emma wrapped both hands around her cup. She looked at the terminal, the ordinary evening tide of it, the families and the business travelers, and the kids wearing noise-canceling headphones, and the older couple near the window sharing a sandwich and not talking. The comfortable silence of people who had been together long enough that silence was a form of conversation. She thought about what Voss had said in the operations room. The nurse who checks on a dog's dew claw because she noticed his gait. She'd said it as evidence of something, and she wasn't wrong, but she was also not entirely right because the thing she was describing wasn't a skill or a capability. It was a disposition. The particular inability to walk past a problem that was solvable if you paid attention. Emma had spent 4 years paying attention to different problems. Problems that came through an emergency room door at 2 a.m. and needed someone to be present and competent and to not panic. She was good at that. She intended to keep being good at it. But she was also the person who had heard a dog make a sound in a corridor and known immediately what it meant. Those weren't two different people. They were the same person with a larger range than she'd been allowing herself to use. I'm not leaving Callaway Regional, Emma said. I'm not asking you to, Voss said. And I'm not available on demand. If I have something to offer on a specific situation, we negotiate each time. I have conditions, and the conditions are non-negotiable. That's fair? I mean it, Miriam. Non-negotiable. I know you do, Voss said. That's why I'm agreeing. Emma looked at her for a moment. Voss's face was doing the thing it did when she was being genuine. Slightly less arranged than usual, the calibrated quality relaxing by a few degrees. The source, Emma said. Greer. He's going to need support. What he went through today is not something you decompress from in a standard debrief and then go back to normal. We have protocols. Your protocols aren't enough, and you know it, Emma said. He needs actual medical support, psychological, not a bureaucratic wellness check, actual sustained care. She held Voss's gaze. That's part of my conditions. Voss was quiet for a moment. I'll make it happen. In writing, Emma said. Something moved across Voss's face that was almost a smile. You've gotten harder to negotiate with. 4 years of hospital administration, Emma said. You learn to put things in writing. She boarded the 7:15 with 4 minutes to spare. The gate agent gave her the mild eye roll of someone who had been making final boarding announcements for 3 minutes, and Emma accepted it without argument because it was entirely deserved, and because she had used up her available conflict for 1 day and then some. The seat was a middle seat. The man by the window was asleep before they'd finished boarding. The woman on the aisle had a toddler on her lap who was investigating Emma's bag strap with the total focus of someone encountering a bag strap for the first time. "Sorry," the woman said. "It's fine," Emma said. She let the toddler hold the strap. The plane pushed back. The terminal receded through the window past the sleeping man's shoulder. The ordinary exterior of it, glass and steel and signage, nothing in its appearance suggesting what the morning had contained. Emma watched it go. She thought about Rex, already on his way to Fort Kesling with Kessler beside him for the transfer. She thought about how dogs trusted without explanation, without documentation, without the slow human work of deciding whether a person was worth it. They read you at the level of what you actually were and responded to that, and they were right more often than not. She thought about Cross, who would face a formal review, a reprimand in his service record, and mandatory leadership remediation, who had earned all of it and who had, at the end, done something small and correct and genuine in the space between the earning and the consequence. She didn't know what that made him. She knew what it meant, which was that people were not the worst thing they did in the first 30 seconds of a situation, but they were also not absolved of it by one better moment. The record held both. That was right. She thought about Hargrove saying your name deserves to be attached to what you did today. She hadn't realized, until he said it, how much weight she'd been carrying in the not saying. 4 years of her own name existing in a redacted space, the specific quiet of a life built around what she chose not to be, and how sustainable that had been for a while, and how this morning had put a crack in it that she wasn't sure she wanted to repair. She didn't want to be a different person. She wanted to be this person, all of her, the nurse and the other thing, the woman who noticed dew claws, and the woman who knew which wire to touch and where. Not in service of anyone else's agenda, in service of whatever the moment actually needed. The toddler fell asleep against Emma's arm somewhere over the state line. Heavy and boneless, the way small children slept. Absolute. Emma didn't move her arm. She looked out the window at the dark and thought about her mother's apartment in Clearwater, and the medication on the first of the month, and the lunch that was now going to be dinner, and how she would sit across from her mother and drink bad tea and be just that, just Emma, just her daughter, and it would be enough. It would be entirely enough. And underneath that, quiet, not urgent, the particular hum of something that had been switched back on after a long dormancy, was the knowledge that she was also more than that the more had been in her all along, that 4 years of emergency medicine had not diminished it, but built it differently, that what she'd done today was not a return to something she'd left, but a proof of something she'd never stopped being. Nobody got to decide what she was except her. Not the lieutenant who'd looked at green scrubs and seen a liability, not the structures and clearances and administrative decisions that had dissolved a program and sent 6 trained people back into ordinary life, as if ordinary life were the smaller thing. Not even Voss, who meant well and asked hard things, and was still in the end asking Emma to choose. Emma had chosen. She was choosing now, the way she chose every time she walked into a trauma bay, deliberately, with full knowledge of what it cost, without apology for the fact that it was her choice to make. The plane descended through cloud cover. Clearwater appeared below in a grid of lights, ordinary and specific, her mother's neighborhood somewhere in that grid making coffee and watching the door. Emma looked at it and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsteady since 6 that morning. Not peace exactly, not the smooth resolution that stories were supposed to provide. Something more honest than that. The particular weight of a day that had been real, that had cost something, that had mattered in ways that wouldn't all be visible for a long time. She had walked into the wrong corridor at the wrong airport on a day she was running late, with a dead phone charger and a gas station coffee and 4 hours of sleep. She had walked out of it with her name in a record, a dog's pain caught before it became damage, a source alive who shouldn't have been, and a lieutenant who would, for the rest of his career, hesitate for 2 full seconds before he decided he'd already read a room. None of it was clean. None of it had gone the way anyone planned. That was the thing about real situations. They didn't care about your plan. They cared about who you were at the moment they arrived, and whether you were enough of yourself to meet them. Emma Carter was. She'd known it for years. Today, finally, So did everyone else. The wheels touched down, and she went to see her mother.